All of my guests tonight, some lives have been touched in some way by knife crime. First up, Ken Hinds has worked as a community activist and youth worker in London for decades, specifically campaigning against what he sees as the improper use of stop and search powers by police. Leroy Logan was awarded an MBE for his work as Superintendent in the Metropolitan Police, and he's also a former chair of the Black Police Association Charitable Trust. And also with me is Sam Rowe. Now, he is the founder of the Academy of Hard Knocks, a mixed martial arts gym he set up with the aim of helping disadvantaged young people and keeping them away from knives and gangs. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Ken, I'm going to start with you. This is Theresa May taking action right at the very top, the Prime Minister doing what she thinks needs to be done now to tackle this problem. Is it too little, too late?
I don't think it's... I think she's being dragged screaming by the Home Office and other people to change her policy, which was working. Because what's happened now, the simple fact that they're lowering the authority on Section 60, the no suspicion, worries me. Because what it shows to me is that intelligent-led stops and search has gone out the window, they've lost the plot. So
when you say her initial, what she was doing initially was working, are we talking about the stop and search? The best use stop and search scheme that she's put in place, which means that the police will be held for account the way that they conducted themselves in a stop and search. But we've seen stop and search reduce significantly under that, and yet we're seeing knife crime going up, the number of deaths going up. So is there a link there? What I can say to you, in 2008, there was another spike, but the reduction in police numbers didn't start till after 2010. So what are we saying? Is there a correlation? No, there isn't. I just feel at the end of the day is that what we're finding that's kind of exacerbates situation is inexperienced police officers in the way that they're conducting stops and search. Okay, let me make it quite clear. I'm not against stop and search. I'm just against the way that inexperienced police officers are emotionally damaging people that they're engaged. Okay, let's get the view of a former police officer. Does Ken have a point here in terms of the way stop and search has been run over the last few years?
Well, no, it has been dealt with a lot better by it being more intelligence-based. But, you know, stop and search is a blunt tool that's sharpened up with community intelligence. The more trust and confidence you have in the community, or the community having the police, then the police gets more intelligence. You can't arrest your way out of this problem. You can't stop and search your way out of this problem. You've got to work in partnership with the community. And then you have to recognise the traumatised communities that are there, especially with young people suffering from adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, the lack of resilience to deal with that. And as a result of that, they should be treated more as patients than just potential prisoners.
OK, Sam, what do you think the issue is here? Is it more the fact that we are seeing a culture where young people, young men, boys, feel like they have to walk out of the house with a knife, with a blunt, with a knife instrument?
Boys and girls, unfortunately, and they feel they need to carry a knife for their own protection. Well, we show them a different way, a different path, how to deal with... you don't need it for your own protection. You've got a pair of legs, run. We teach them a different way to deal with protecting themselves, self-defence. But there's so much can be learned from this. What's happening now is it's anarchy on our streets, and it needs to be done. It needs to be stopped.
OK, well, gentlemen, please do stay with us. I'm going to hear from you in a moment. But first, let's look at why children are being drawn into crime in the first place. And ministers are considering whether frontline staff in schools, the NHS and communities could be held accountable if they don't spot them. Our chief correspondent, Tessa Chapman, reports.
The reality of treating knife crime injuries is grim, and it is happening in our hospitals every day. Now the government wants a fresh approach, to view the violence not as a wound to be cleared up, but a disease with a root to be treated before it takes hold. Kaya is a youth worker who's mentored hundreds of teenagers. He's telling me about one of many who's caught up in gang violence.
One of my colleagues dropped him home, and less than a minute later, one of his friends came running around the corner, bleeding from where he'd actually just been stabbed.
In Kaya's experience, carrying a knife is usually a symptom of wider problems, whether at home, school or elsewhere.
What would make the job easier is if I was able to communicate with other professionals who are familiar with the young person, and if there was that transparency there, then obviously teamwork makes the dream work. Everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet, and we're actively playing a part in that young person's life to help them progress.
That kind of working is the norm in Scotland, where knife crime is treated as a public health issue, not just a policing one, and the murder rate has dropped by almost 40% in a decade. But what about the idea of a public health duty, where nurses, doctors or teachers would be legally obliged to report concerns?
I think it's a pretty despicable ploy, really, to pass the buck to frontline staff who are struggling, actually, to cope with this situation at a time when there's huge cuts to services, to schools and colleges, and actually it's the government that should be coming up with solutions to this, not trying to put the buck onto teachers and nurses.
And there are calls for short-term solutions too.
Key thing is what's going to happen next, what follow-throughs they're going to be. What I'd like to see is for her to every week chair a meeting of all the key people, knock heads together and demand action. If there isn't action, ask why. If there's a need for resources, give those resources.
For many, that means more police. Kaya believes funding for teaching about knives in primary schools would make the difference. Some violence might be preventable, but it won't go away of its own accord. Tessa Chapman, 5 News.
Let's get reaction to this from my guests. First of all, Sam, what do you think? The fact that teachers, healthcare workers, doctors, nurses in hospitals are going to be held accountable?
They shouldn't be held accountable for it at all. It strictly lays at the government's door. They cut our policing, they cut our youth clubs, they cut our services. There's no clubs like mine about. I struggle every day to get funding. I spend 90% of my time chasing funding for knife crime when I should be doing what I do best, is taking knives off the streets and off kids.
I mean, do you think, Leroy, that there is a potential link between police cuts, and Theresa May certainly doesn't think so? Or how would you feel if when you were a police officer, that on top of the work that you had to do in fighting crime, you could also potentially get into trouble if you don't spot and come out and speak out about any potential links of the young person in violent crime?
Do you know, this recent thing by the Home Secretary saying that there's this statutory requirement is actually disrespectful to teachers and other agencies, because we already have the safeguarding policies to help to spot these issues and to signpost young people where they feel could be at risk, because even the counter-terrorism policy has been running that. But my real issue is this is the blame game being brought out, so they pass the buck from a lot the austerity. And you know, the austerity is not just about the police numbers. It's around having the right assets in place with the cultural intelligence, the cultural competence to deal with the people who need help, and not just, you know, generalising and stereotyping. So you need to have the right safeguarding agencies, the right officers to ensure that they're not only preventing, but having sustainable engagement, because one of the biggest issues around young people carrying knives is fear. So if police and other safeguarding agencies can't make them feel secure and safe, then they'll find safety elsewhere.
I mean, Sam, can I just ask you really quickly, I'm quite curious, how do you go out, reach out to young people and persuade them to put their knives down? I mean, has anything... You spent time in jail, you've been there. Does that help? Has that helped?
That does help, it does help. I'm using positive role models. Myself, I learn from my own mistakes. I teach others from my mistakes. But these kids, they seem to think they have to carry a knife for their own protection. If you show them another way, they don't need to carry a knife for their own protection. I dealt with 9 kids recently. 7 of them admitted carrying a knife on a daily basis. After doing 6 weeks of me, they don't carry knives no more. They don't feel they need to for their own protection. No one needs a knife for their protection.
You're making them feel safe, right?
Yeah.
And secure, and that's one of the biggest
part
issues.
of something.
I mean, Ken, in terms of you and what you've seen, what do you think needs to be dealt with? I mean, let's talk about parents even. Should parents play more of a role here? We're talking about schools and teachers. What about the parents?
Let's talk about getting knives off the street, physical knife off our streets. What we do as part of the Band of Brothers is to work with young men, 18 to 25, who's in the criminal justice system. And what we do, we work with growing their emotional intelligence. And what we find in the last year, I've given 6 young men who's been predators for carrying knives, and these are guys who's done time for knife, to give up their weapons. interventions.
What about getting to them earlier before you even get to that stage?
It would be nice to get in the primary school and actually start working with these young people. Now, and part of our programme, Community Against Violence, we've got the aunties and uncles, and that's specifically targeting, supporting families, just to end and be an extension of the family unit, because it takes a village to bring up a youngster. And if you neglect that youngster, they may come back to burn the village down. Well, and I'm saying we are the villagers that care, and we will make that difference. Well,
it certainly looks Theresa May is looking to Scotland and looking at that sort of holistic approach in dealing with knife crime. I am afraid, though, we are going to have to leave it there. But Ken Hinds, Leroy Logan and Sam Rowe, really good talking to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.